I almost kept my mouth shut today. Almost. But then I thought, what's the point of being 91 if I can't finally say the things I've been choking on for decades? So here I am, and I'm going to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. But I've earned the right to make people uncomfortable. I've been polite for 70 years. That's enough. I told my family everything. That was my mistake. Not all at once. No, it was slower than that, more gradual, like water wearing down a stone. A confession here, an honest answer there. A moment where I thought, surely they can handle this. Surely they love me enough to hear the truth. And you know what I learned? Love and truth don't always live in the same house. Sometimes love needs a few rooms kept locked. I learned that too late. I'm going to make sure you don't. Let me start with what happened to me, and then I'll tell you the 7 things, the 7 secrets you should never, ever share with your family after 70. Not because they're bad people, not because they don't love you, but because the moment you say certain things out loud, you change the way they see you. And once that changes, you can't change it back. Trust me, I've tried. My name is Cecily. I'm 91 years old. I've been a wife, a mother, a widow, a burden. That last one is their word, not mine. But I heard it once through a kitchen wall, and words like that don't wash off. I was married to Harold for 54 years. No, 53. I always add a year because the last one felt like 10. Harold was a quiet man, not cold. Quiet. There's a difference, though most people never learn it. He said what needed saying and nothing more, and for most of our marriage I thought that was a flaw. Now I think it might have been the smartest thing about him. He knew what I didn't. That some words, once they leave your mouth, become weapons. Not because you meant them to, but because the person hearing them wasn't ready. Or because they heard something different from what you said, or because the truth, plain and simple, is just too heavy for some people to carry without dropping it on your head. I dropped a lot of truths on my family, and they dropped them right back on me, but sharpened. I want to be clear about something before I go on. I love my children. I love David, who has his father's jaw and his father's way of standing in a doorway, like he's guarding something. I love Helen, my daughter in Delaware, married to Richard, who is a decent man even if he talks too much about golf. I love Paul, my youngest, who is always the one most likely to say the thing nobody wanted to hear. He got that from me, I suppose, and I'm sorry for it. And my granddaughter Sophie, who is growing into a woman so fast, it makes my chest ache. I love her in that fierce, protective way that skips a generation and hits harder because of it. I love all of them, and I'm telling you these 7 secrets, not because my family is cruel, but because love, when it's mixed with too much information, curdles, like milk left out too long. It's still milk, but you wouldn't drink it. The first secret I should have kept, and listen to me carefully because this one cost me more than I can tell you. The first secret is your money, what you have, what you saved, what Harold left me. I made the mistake of being honest about my finances with my children. I thought it was the responsible thing to do. I thought, they're adults. They should know where things stand, in case something happens to me. In case I fall in the bathroom one morning and can't reach the phone. And believe me, that fear is real. I've lain on that cold tile floor at 4 a.m. thinking this is it. This is how they find me, in my nightgown with my hair undone. I thought they should know. So I told them. I told David and Helen and Paul exactly what I had, the savings account, the small pension, what the house was worth. I even told them about the little envelope Harold kept in the back of the closet, $1,200 in cash folded neatly, because Harold always said you should have enough to leave if you ever needed to. He never left. But the money was there, and I swear to you, the temperature in the room changed. Not immediately. It was subtle. Like when the season shifts and you can't point to the exact day it got cold. But one morning you reach for a sweater you haven't touched in months. That's what happened. David started calling more often, which sounds nice, except the calls always circled back to the house, whether I'd thought about selling, whether the neighborhood was still safe for a woman alone. Helen, my daughter who lives in Delaware with Richard, she started mentioning financial advisors, very casually, too casually. Mom, I met this wonderful man who helps people plan for their future. I'm 91. My future is next Tuesday, if I'm lucky. And Paul. Paul was the worst because Paul was the most honest about it. He didn't dress it up. He said, Mom, you should put my name on the account, just in case. Just in case of what? In case I suddenly forget how to write a check. In case 91 years of managing a household, stretching Harold's paycheck like bread dough until it covered everything, in case all of that just evaporates because I'm old. I didn't add his name, but the damage was done. Because now every time I buy something, a new blouse, a box of chocolates, a book I'll probably never finish, I feel watched, not directly. They don't stand over my shoulder, but I feel it. The weight of their awareness, and that's what happens when you tell your family about your money. You hand them a ledger and suddenly your life has a budget they didn't approve. I want to tell you about my neighbor, Ruth Kepler. Ruth was 87 when her son convinced her to merge their bank accounts. For convenience, he said. Ruth had saved her whole life. She worked as a seamstress, those hands stitching wedding dresses for other women's daughters, while her own daughter wore hand-me-downs. She saved every extra cent, and within 2 years of merging accounts, her son had spent most of it, not on gambling or drinking, nothing dramatic, just absorbing it. A car repair here, a tuition payment there, always with the promise of paying it back. Ruth died with $400 to her name. $400 after 60 years of sewing in a back room with a lamp that flickered. I think about Ruth when I look at that envelope in my closet. Harold's $1,200. Still there. Still folded. Still mine. So that's the first one. Never tell them what you have, not the exact numbers. You can say, I'm fine. I'm comfortable. Everything is taken care of. That's enough. That's more than enough. The details are yours. They were always yours. You know, I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way. Decades of giving too much of myself, saying too much, trusting that honesty was always the right policy. It wasn't. And I started writing some of these things down, the things I wish someone had told me when I was 65, and still thought openness was a virtue in every situation. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you're nodding right now the way I think you might be, I left something in the first comment below this video. It's there for you. No rush. But it's there, and I think it might matter. The second secret, and this one is harder because it feels like a betrayal to even say it, is your health. Not the big things. If you have cancer, yes, they need to know. If you're having surgery, fine, tell them. But the small things, the ache in your hip that wakes you at 3 a.m, the dizziness when you stand too fast, the fact that your hands shake now when you pour tea, and sometimes you spill it and stand there looking at the puddle on the counter, feeling like a child who's been caught. Those things, keep them to yourself. I know that sounds cruel. It isn't. It's survival. Because here's what happens when you tell your family every ache and pain. They start building a case, not consciously. They're not villains, but every complaint becomes a brick. And eventually those bricks become a wall. And one day, your daughter sits across from you at the kitchen table. The same table where you taught her to roll pie crust when she was 7. And she says, "Mom, we've been talking and we think it's time." Time for what? Time to leave the house where I raised them? Time to move into a room with a view of a parking lot and a nurse who calls me sweetie like I'm 5? Time to stop being a person and start being a patient? I made this mistake myself. 2 winters ago, I had a spell. That's what I call it. A spell. My doctor has a longer word for it, but I prefer mine. I got dizzy in the kitchen and I grabbed the counter and knocked over a glass. One of the good glasses, the ones Harold's mother gave us for our wedding, and I watched it shatter on the floor and I thought, well, there goes 1969. I told Helen about it. I shouldn't have. It was a small thing. I was fine. The glass was the only casualty, but Helen told David, and David called my doctor. My doctor, as if I'm a child who can't make her own appointments. And suddenly, there were conversations happening about me, around me, without me, like I was the weather, something to be discussed and prepared for. My friend Margaret Holloway, who lived 3 streets over, who used to bring me tomatoes from her garden every August, beautiful ugly tomatoes that tasted like summer. Margaret made that mistake worse than I did. She told her son about her knee, then her back, then the time she forgot the word for curtain, and stood in her living room pointing at the window saying the thing, the hanging thing. Her son had her in a facility within 6 months. She died there 14 months later, not from her knee or her back or even from forgetting words. She died from being decided about. There's a difference between dying and being put somewhere to die. And if you think there isn't, you haven't been paying attention. So the second secret you keep is the small decline. The body's slow argument with itself. You handle it. You adapt. You hold the railing. You sit down when you're dizzy. You let the tea spill and you clean it up, and you don't tell a soul. Because the moment you say, I'm having trouble, they hear, I can't manage. And those are 2 completely different sentences. The third secret is your loneliness. And God, this one is difficult because loneliness at 91 isn't what people think. It's not dramatic. It's not sitting in a dark room weeping. It's Tuesday afternoon and there's nothing on television and the phone hasn't rung and you realize you haven't spoken a word out loud since yesterday morning when you said good morning to the cat and the cat didn't even look up. It's making a pot of coffee for 2 because your hands still remember the measurements for 2 and then pouring half of it down the drain. It's Harold's chair, still there, still empty, still shaped like him, somehow after 6 years. But you cannot tell your family you're lonely. You cannot, because loneliness to them sounds like a problem they need to solve, and their solutions are never the ones you need. David will say, Mom, you should come live with us. And I tried that. I tried that for 3 weeks. And I sat in their guest room listening to their life happening on the other side of the wall. The children laughing, David and his wife arguing about something I couldn't hear, the television too loud. And I was lonelier in that full house than I ever was in my empty one, because lonely in your own home is private. Lonely in someone else's home is humiliating. The house was full of people, and I was the loneliest person in it. That's a special kind of cold. I remember one night at David's house. It was a Thursday, I think, because his wife makes pasta on Thursdays. Always the same pasta, always overcooked. And I bit my tongue every time, because you don't tell your daughter-in-law her pasta is overcooked. That's another secret I learned for free. And the boys were running through the hallway, and the dog was barking, and David was on the phone, and his wife was in the kitchen. And I was sitting on their couch with a blanket on my lap, like a decoration. Like a lamp they'd moved from one house to another, and hadn't figured out where to plug in. Nobody spoke to me for 2 hours. Not out of malice, out of life. Their life. The life they were living around me, but not with me. And I sat there thinking, I am a ghost in this house. I haunt it, but I do not live here. I went home the next day. I told David I missed my garden. That was partly true. What I really missed was my own silence. My loneliness at home is mine. It has my shape, my rhythm, my rules. Their loneliness was borrowed and ill-fitting, like wearing someone else's shoes. Helen suggested a senior center. She printed out a brochure, activities, crafts, social engagement, as if loneliness is a scheduling problem, as if I could fix the absence of a man who knew exactly how I liked my eggs. Slightly burned on the edges, don't ask me why. It's how my mother made them. By sitting in a circle with strangers making picture. Frames out of popsicle sticks. If this is hitting close to home, check the pinned comment. I left something there for you. I don't need entertainment. I need someone to know me, and the people who know me are mostly dead. That's not self-pity. That's arithmetic. When you're 91, you've outlived most of the witnesses to your life, the people who remember you at 30, at 40, at 50, the ones who could say 40 at 50, the ones who could say, remember that summer, and you'd both laugh without having to explain. They're gone. And no senior center replaces that. Nothing replaces that. You just learn to carry the absence like you carry everything else. In your body, in your hands, in the way you still set 2 places at the table sometimes, before you catch yourself and put 1 plate back in the cabinet, quietly, so the house doesn't notice. So you keep your loneliness to yourself. You sit with it. You learn its shape. And on the good days, you find that it's not always sharp. Sometimes it's almost soft, like a blanket you didn't ask for, but you've gotten used to. You live with it. That's what women my age do. We live with things. The 4th secret, and this is the one that got me in the most trouble, is your opinion of their choices, your children's marriages, their parenting, their careers, the way they raise your grandchildren. You have opinions. Of course you do. You've lived 91 years. You have opinions about everything from politics to pie crust. But the moment you share those opinions with your adult children, you become the enemy. I told Helen once, that I thought she was too hard on Sophie. My granddaughter Sophie, who was 14 at the time, and going through that phase where everything is either the end of the world or the most boring thing that ever existed. Helen was yelling, really yelling, and I said very quietly, Helen, she's just a child. She'll grow out of it. You did. And Helen turned to me with a look I had never seen on her face before. Cold. Not angry. Cold. And she said, "You don't get to tell me how to raise my daughter, Mom. You weren't exactly perfect." And then she listed things I'd done when she was growing up, things I'd forgotten, things I hadn't forgotten, but had hoped she had. She kept them all, you see. Every mistake I made, she kept in a drawer somewhere and pulled them out like receipts. I spent 40 years making sure everyone was fed, and no one ever asked if I was hungry. But let me forget one school play, one parent-teacher conference. One afternoon when I was so tired, I locked the bathroom door and sat on the floor and cried because I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a thought that wasn't about someone else's needs. Let me forget one thing, and suddenly that's the headline. Not the 40 years, the one afternoon. I learned that night that your children don't want your wisdom about their lives. They want your approval. That's all. They want you to nod and say, "You're doing wonderfully." And sometimes you have to say that even when you don't entirely believe it. That's not lying. That's love in its most practical form. Knowing when your honesty will help and when it will only draw blood. Harold understood this. He never said a word about how David was raising those boys. Not one word. And I used to think that was cowardice. Now I think it was the kindest thing he ever did. Silence as a gift. Not the silence of a man who doesn't care. The silence of a man who cares so much he's willing to swallow his own tongue to keep the peace. I wish I'd learned that trick sooner. The fifth secret is one that surprised me, because I didn't think it would matter, but it does. Never tell your family that you've changed your mind about something important. Your faith, your politics, your beliefs about how the world works, because they have you fixed in their minds. They know who you are or who you were, and they don't want that to change. I stopped going to church when I was 83, not because I stopped believing in God. I still talk to him most mornings, though I suspect he's as tired of my voice as I am of my knees. But because the church changed, or I changed, or maybe both. The sermons started sounding like speeches. The people started feeling like strangers wearing familiar faces. And the pew, our pew, the third from the back on the left side, where Harold always sat with his arm along the back, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. That pew felt wrong without him, like a sentence missing its most important word. So I stopped going. And when I told Paul, he looked at me like I'd told him I was moving to Mars. "But you've always gone to church, Mom." Always. As if I'm not allowed to rethink something at 83. As if 91 years of thinking should produce the same conclusion every time. He called David. David called Helen. Suddenly there was a family discussion about whether Mom was okay, whether this was a sign. A sign of what? Of a woman who spent 60 years in the same pew, finally deciding she'd rather talk to God from her own kitchen, where at least the coffee is better. They treated my change of mind like a symptom instead of a decision. And that taught me something. After 70, your family doesn't want you to grow. They want you to stay the same. Because if you change, they have to adjust their picture of you, and adjustment is work. And people, even people who love you, don't always want to do the work. I mentioned something earlier in the first comment below. It's still there if you need it. So keep your evolution private. Read what you want. Think what you want. Change your mind about everything if it suits you. But don't announce it. Let them keep their version of you. It costs you nothing, and it saves you the exhaustion of being questioned about your own inner life by people who think they know it better than you do. The sixth secret, and I wish I'd learned this one sooner, I really do, is your past. The real past. The things that happened before they were born, before Harold, before the house and the garden and the woman they think they know. I made the mistake. One Christmas, it was the Christmas after Harold died, the first one, the one where the turkey was too small and nobody said it, but everyone was thinking it. I made the mistake of telling a story about before Harold, a story about a man I loved when I was 22, before I met Harold, a different man, a man named Thomas who worked at the post office and had the most beautiful hands I'd ever seen. Long fingers like a piano player, though he couldn't play a note. I loved him. I loved him in the way you love at 22, which is recklessly and without any understanding of what love actually costs. I told this story at Christmas because I'd had a glass of wine. One glass, I'm not a drinker, but that first Christmas alone felt like swallowing glass, and I needed something soft. And I thought it was a harmless story, a sweet story, a story about a young woman who loved and then loved differently and built a life. But my children didn't hear a sweet story. They heard their mother saying she loved someone who wasn't their father. And David, who has Harold's jaw and Harold's stubbornness and Harold's way of going quiet when he's hurt, David said, "So what? You settled for Dad?" I didn't settle. I chose. There's a difference so wide you could fall into it. And David fell. He fell right into the gap between what I said and what he heard, and I've never been able to pull him out. I chose Harold because Harold was the kind of man you build a life with. Thomas was the kind of man you burn in. And burning feels wonderful at 22, but it doesn't keep you warm at 40, at 60, at 80. Harold kept me warm. Harold was a slow fire in a stone hearth, and I chose that. I chose it with my whole heart. But David couldn't hear that anymore. The story of Thomas had gotten in the way. And here's the part that shames me. I also didn't tell the whole story about Thomas. I didn't tell them that Thomas drank, that he disappeared for days, that the beautiful hands I admired weren't always gentle. I left those parts out because they were ugly, and I wanted the story to be pretty. And in doing so, I made Thomas into a rival for Harold's memory instead of a lesson I'd learned. That's the danger of sharing your past. You edit it, even when you're trying to be honest, and the edited version causes more damage than the truth it would have. So keep your past to yourself. The loves, the losses, the versions of you that existed before they did, those belong to you. Your children don't need to know the woman you were. They need the woman you are. And the woman you were might confuse them, or hurt them, or make them question things that don't need questioning. Some things are easier to read than to hear. I put it in the pinned comment for when you're ready. The seventh secret, the last one and the heaviest, is this. Never tell your family that you're ready to die. I don't mean that in a dark way. I don't mean I want to die. I mean that at 91, death is not a stranger. It's not even an enemy anymore. It's more like a neighbor I haven't met yet, but whose house I can see from my window. I know it's there. I'm not afraid of it. Not the way I was at 60, when the idea of it made me grip the bedsheets at night and pray for more time. At 91, time and I have made our peace. I've had enough of it. Not too much. I'm not ungrateful, but enough. And I'm not in a hurry, but I'm not running from it either. I said something close to this to Helen last spring. We were sitting on my porch, the porch Harold built, though it leans a little now like me. And Helen was talking about some trip she wanted to take me on, some cruise or something. And I said, "Sweetheart, I don't need a cruise. I've seen enough. When it's time, and I'm not going to fight it." I said it calmly. I said it with peace. I meant it as a gift, a way of saying, don't worry about me, don't carry this weight, I'm all right. Helen cried, not quietly. She cried the way she cried when she was 6 and dropped her ice cream cone on the sidewalk. That same helpless, inconsolable sound. And then she got angry. "Don't talk like that, Mom. Don't you dare talk like that." As if my acceptance of my own mortality was an act of cruelty toward her, as if I owed it to her to pretend I was going to live forever, to play along with the fantasy that 91 is just a number and I've got decades left. I don't have decades left. I might not have years, and I'm all right with that. But I can never say it again, because when you tell your family you're at peace with dying, they don't hear peace. They hear giving up. They hear abandonment. They hear she doesn't love us enough to want to stay. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I love them enough to not make my death their emergency. I'm saying I've had a full plate and I don't need another serving. But they can't hear it. Not yet. Maybe not until they're 91 themselves. And I pray they get there, every one of them, even Paul, who tests my patience like no one since Harold. I want to tell you something about Harold and dying because I think it matters. Harold knew. The last few months he knew. He didn't say it in words. Harold never said anything in words that he could say in a look, but I saw it in the way he started putting things in order. He fixed the drawer in the kitchen that had been stuck for 12 years. He labeled the fuse box, which he'd never done, writing in that careful handwriting of his that looked like a schoolboy's. He sharpened every knife in the house, and one morning, about 3 weeks before the end, he made my coffee and brought it to me in bed, which he'd done every morning for decades. But this time, he sat on the edge of the bed and watched me drink it. Just watched. And I knew. I knew that he was memorizing me the way I would later memorize his chair. And neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. That's 54 years. That's what 54 years buys you, Shah. A language that doesn't need sound. He died on a Wednesday. I remember because the lilacs outside were blooming. And I thought, how can flowers bloom on a day like this? But they did. They bloomed anyway. That's what the world does. It goes on. It blooms. And you either bloom with it or you sit in the kitchen and stare at the coffee pot and wonder why your hands are still making coffee for 2. So you keep it to yourself. The peace, the readiness. The way you sometimes sit in Harold's chair. I do that now. I sit in his chair, not mine, because his was always softer, and I spent 54 years respecting his claim on it, and now it's mine. And you look out the window and you think, I had a good life, not a perfect one, not an easy one, but a good one, full of bread that burned and bread that rose, full of children who grew into people I mostly understand, full of a man who made my coffee every morning and never once said I love you, but showed me in 1,000 ways that were better than words. You think all of that, and you let it be yours. You don't share it. You don't wrap it up in a speech. You just sit with it in the chair that used to be his, and you listen to the house settle around you. The creaks, the sighs, the way old houses breathe like old women, slowly and with effort, but still breathing. And you let that be enough. I'm sorry if this wasn't what you expected. I know people want wisdom from old women, neat little lessons wrapped in ribbon. I don't have that. I have regrets. I have 7 secrets I should have kept. I have a house that's too big, and a heart that's too full, and hands that shake when I pour my tea. But I also have this. I'm still here. I'm still speaking. And if you're listening, really listening, then maybe you'll do what I didn't. Maybe you'll keep a few doors closed. Not because you're dishonest, but because some truths are private. Some truths belong only to the person who lived them. And some truths, when spoken aloud, don't set you free. They just give other people the keys to a house you should have kept locked. A woman's silence isn't peace. It's a room full of things she decided not to say. But sometimes that room is the safest place she has. Harold would have liked that line. He would have nodded. Just once the way he did and gone back to his newspaper. And I would have known that he agreed. 54 years of that, of one nod being enough. I miss it more than I can say. But I don't say it, not to them. I say it here, to you, whoever you are. The first comment below has something I wish I'd found sooner. Take a look when you can. And if I could leave you with one thing, not advice. I'm too old and too wrong about too many things to give advice. But one thing. Choose your silence wisely. Not all silence is weakness. Some silence is armor. Some silence is the kindest thing you'll ever do for the people you love.